Fantastic. So, welcome, Yehudah. I want to give a little intro and then we'll get into some discussion. But for those who don't know Yehudah Webster, he's a spiritual activist and community organizer who works to animate and integrate anti-racist behaviors and culture in communities, supporting the collective organizing, advocacy, and direct service efforts to dismantle racism systematically. He's a program director and faculty at Inside Out Wisdom and Action Project, and he equips communities with the daily concrete spiritual tools of Mussar, which we'll discuss today, to subvert racism within ourselves and others through facilitating workshops, consulting with organizations, and building a community of anti-racist practice, which I actually participated in last year. Yehudah is a graduate of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice's Grace Paley Organizing Fellowship, Ben the Arc Sella Leadership Program, Inside Out Wisdom in Action, which is now Kirva's Ovdim Fellowship, and a recipient of the Pomegranate Prize through the Covenant Foundation. So, Yehudah, thank you for being here. Yehudah and I met when I moved to LA, I think at a friend's brunch. As I said, we took your class, which still moves me today. I know, Yehudah, you sit on several boards. You're one of my go-tos when it comes to spiritual work and community building. So lucky to call you a friend and mentor. Thank you again for being here to share your wisdom, especially on this holiday of Simchat Torah. So welcome. Yehudah, do you want to start with a blessing or a note just about Simchat Torah, since I know you and many others are celebrating today?
Yes, thank you, Seth. First of all, thank you for having me, and it's really great to be here. Appreciate your camaraderie and friendship. And Baruch Hashem, yeah, it's so good to do this on Simchat Torah. You know, in Israel, Simchat Torah Shmini Atzeret, it's one day. Here in the States, it's 2 days. So, I feel okay about doing this today. And I dancing in with the Torah last night, which was really sweet. And my short blessing here is that may we be blessed with the light of Torah, its instructions, its love, and to bring that light and love forth to our communities and to ourselves, to our families, to the world.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Yehudah. So for those who know nothing, and for those who know something a little bit about Mussar, can you just start with a little teaching, a little sharing about what Mussar is?
Totally, totally. I'm curious, since we're such a nice small crew here, how many of y'all have interacted with Mussar ever in your time? Not. Okay, all right. So we got okay.
There we go.
I read the article on the link, and that was great. Thank you. Headline of it,
Right on, right on. So I'll be able to maybe go a little bit more in depth. Mussar, I think at the heart of it, if there was one thing you took away from this, is that it's about bridging the gap, bridging gaps between where and who we are and where and who we want to be or speak about being, right? Oftentimes I found, I come to this work from the perspective of community organizing, and oftentimes we find that our stated values are different than how we actually behave and how we actually show up in the world, right? And I'm sure we experience that all in our governance, in our leadership, on our boards. And so Mussar is really about how do we bridge that gap between our rhetoric and actually how we show up and behave in our leadership. It's, the Mussar teachers, they say, one of the largest gaps to bridge is between what the head knows and what the heart feels. And Mussar is really a discipline about that. It's really another way you can think about Mussar is living with integrity, wholeness, and holiness. Biblically, this word shows up all over the Torah and, the Bible. It's all over the prophets, it's in the Psalms, it's in the Proverbs. First line of the Proverbs, you'll see this word that's, Mussar, and it's often translated there as discipline or instruction. And, the root of the word Mussar is sur, which means to turn, right? So we in Psalms, it says sur mira, turn from evil towards goodness, right? And so if you think about it, if you're following an instruction, if you're taking on a discipline, you're turning yourself from the disposition that you were at to a new way of being, right? And so that's really what Mussar is really all about, a constant reorientation of the self such that we can live with greater integrity, wholeness. And now, as I said, we see it a lot in the proverb. We see it all over the prophets, as the prophets are coming oftentimes to chastise the people and say, turn away from the evils, exploitation that you're doing to your neighbors, right? And then you see in the Proverbs, because the Proverbs is really all about, well, how do you imbue your life with wisdom? Now, after the destruction of the temple, and you have exile, and the Jewish people are dispersed, and law is now being codified into the Talmud, and we call that really, or Mussar sages call that the duties of the limbs, right? That's the Talmud, the Mishnah that's being codified in the 2nd, 3rd, 5th centuries, and then in the 10th century you had actually a Sufi Muslim Jewish dialogue happening in the south of Spain. And folks were just fervent. Folks were really dedicated to their holy texts and really wanting to live out the values of their texts at the highest level. And so they were asking the question, like, okay, our texts tell us to be generous, to be humble, to be patient, to be compassionate. But they said, I'm not patient. I'm not compassionate. I'm not generous. So how do I actually become that, right? And so from there set out this pursuit to bridge that gap and to codify in a similar manner that the Talmud really lays out in great detail the duties of the limbs, of when to light Shabbat candles, and how to actually, all the minutia of the law of, on Sukkot, you wave the thing this many times in this direct, right? How do you actually do this around what they call the duties of the heart, which is living with that integrity, wholeness, and holiness? Yeah. And so there's this person, Rabbi Bachget ibn Pekuda. He writes in the 10th century in south of Spain, the duties of the heart, Chovot HaLevavot in Hebrew. So Mussar has been around since the 10th century and has really spread out to all the organized areas of the Jewish world. Many different kind of schools of thought of Mussar blossomed in different ways of approaching this work. And then in Lithuania in the 18th, 19th century, you had the beginning of the modern Mussar movement. This guy, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. And he was really concerned about all these other philosophical the Enlightenment was happening. He was really concerned about all these other philosophical movements really pulling young Jews away from being Jewish. And so he really brought back Mussar in a big way. He republished a lot of books that had fallen out of circulation. And he started what we call now the modern Mussar movement. And he was a kind of a wild guy. He famously said he wanted to make yosher as important as kosher. Yosher meaning integrity. And he had this. There's this great story about him where he like pulled these stunts, to really like shake up the community and really get them out of there, just thinking that Judaism was just about being the duties of the limbs, of the exactness of the law, and not actually doing the duties of the heart, of living with that integrity. He famously went to, I'll just end with this quick story. He famously went to a matzah factory. And, he was also mashgiach, a person that would give the stamp of kashrut, that, something is kosher. And so he went to this matzah factory, and he knew that the matzah factory was not paying their workers a fair wage. So he made a big show of going around the factory, checking out all the machinery and the processes. And he came back to the owner of the matzah factory. He said, I'm not going to give you the stamp of kashrut. And the owner was flabbergasted. My matzah is perfect. We have people supervising the flour from the time it's milled. There's no water, there's no moisture. We bake it in 18 minutes. What do you mean my matzah is not? He said, there's blood in your matzah. You're not paying your workers a fair wage. I'm not going to give you a stamp of kashrut. So in this way, he was really trying to bring back that if you're not doing also the duties of the heart, if you're not living with integrity, wholeness, and wholeness, then you're not actually holy. And you can't just be a Jew of the duties of the limbs. And so this is really what Mussar is all about. And in these last, 100 or so years, has been a great renaissance, or maybe even less. I'd really say 50 or so years, been a great renaissance of Mussar, and all different kind of more modern applications of it. And so Kirba, we apply Mussar to the work of justice. How do we advocate to organizers, anybody committed to the work of making the world a better place, use the wisdom and the tools of Mussar to bridge that gap collectively, but also individually, so that we can all live with greater wholeness and holiness in our lives.
Oh man, beautiful. That's I always learn more. The little that I know about Mussar, you're always adding layers and layers. So thank you, Yehudah. You started going there. Share a little bit, if you can, just about your journey to this work of Mussar and anti-racism teaching and activism.
Yeah, thanks for that, Seth. As I was mentioning, I was doing community organizing in New York. For 10 years, really, ever since 2014, I went through J-Fred, Jews for Racial and Economic Justice's organizing fellowship. I'd come up through some of the organizing beforehand, and it was right when Black Lives Matter was really building up and growing, and a national worldwide movement. And I continue to believe deeply in community organizing. I think it's a strong theory of change and other forms of advocacy. And I increasingly became agitated somewhere around 2016, 2017, as many others, right? As our movements in many ways were perpetuating the very harms that we were working to transform and undo at a systemic level, city-state level. And it's fine, on a certain level, that our movements, of course, are going to have moments of racism, of moments of sexism. There will be white supremacy culture in our efforts of social justice. But our inability to bring healing to those moments without spiraling in the harm and people leaving the efforts and schisms happening. And I'm watching that play out on the national level with Black Lives Matter, with Women's March. It was experiencing it and being part of perpetuating that on a hyper local level. In a lot of the organizing I was doing, I became just increasingly agitated, and it just can't be the way. And how are we going to be able to transform the city-state level if we ourselves can't live out the values that we're talking about within our own circles of organizing, right? And because of that, I was also doing a lot of political education, a lot of training around anti-racism. And my classic line at the end of, after really breaking down the what of racism and its systemic nature, people say, Yehudah, what do we do about this? I say, join an organization, because that's how we build our people power. That's how we change policies and legislation. And I just increasingly stopped believing. Every time I said it, it made less and less sense that was the only thing that we should be doing. And it's not that we shouldn't be pushing for policy and legislative change. Yes, and building people power. And if we're not pairing that with our own personal and communal transformation, we're never going to be fully successful. And I think it's not that I was explicitly taught that personal and communal transformation isn't important, but I did get the implicit message from some of my comrades that your personal communal transformation is cute, but it's not the real work. And I was disillusioned from that and realized that no, it's a key part. We need to be doing both simultaneously for us to be successful. And so it was at that time, Tzedek Lab, if you're familiar with it, it's a coalition of Jewish organizers, healers and political educators came together. And I got to experience Rabbi David Jaffe, who's the author of Changing the World from the Inside Out. He taught a Mussar workshop of how he's bringing Mussar to bear for social change. I said, this is what I've been looking for. How do you actually build the spiritual muscle to live out our values and bring more healing and not more harm to our communities? And it was even just a bonus. I was sharing with Juliet that it was Jewish. And, Mussar is not the only way to do this, of course, but it's the Jewish way. And it's a way that is deeply connected to my own convictions, spiritual convictions, and connections with the Most High. So I became a student of Rabbi David's and joined his inaugural fellowship at Kirva. Kirva was just getting going at that time. And then when I moved out to California, I made the switch over. I was organizing full time with JFREG, but I was able to move over and lend my effort to the growing movement of bringing spiritual wisdom and those tools to bear for the work of social justice.
Well, we're glad you did. I'm glad you're here on the West Coast, especially in LA specifically, and just so grateful for your work. And I love that to do the work outside, we need to do the work inside simultaneously. Can you talk a little bit about, when we were talking, I was thinking about inviting you on and really excited about this conversation, thinking about how Mussar relates to boards and governance and leadership in general. In the board work that I do, I rarely have ever talked about Mussar, at least consciously. But now that the more I think about it, underneath that, I see a lot of overlap. And I'm curious if you could lift up how you see the connection between your work on boards and the Mussar work that you do.
Yeah, thanks for that, Seth. If I could just say too, I just want to be clear, my ability on that last point to disrupt moments of racism or harm doesn't mean that we've achieved racial justice. But it is a fair indicator of my ability to be an effective force of change, right? And so that's really how I see the utility of Mussar in the work, to help me be the best force and tool of change as possible. And in many ways, I think that's how I see it applying to the work of leadership, of governance, of being on a board, is helping us overcome our limitations. And we all have them, right? And it's just about, do we have the awareness of what they are? And do we have the tools to help us continuously address those limitations, refine it, and methodically bridge the gap such that they are no longer limitations, but they can be put in its proper place, in its proper time, to be a useful part of our whole selves, right? My uncle was one of my mentors. He says the whole is only present in each of its parts. And so Mussar is all about working with each of the parts within us such that we can be our best whole selves and live with that level of integrity. One of the challenges is that, one of the great Mussar teachers, he says the Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, of which part of that lineage of Mussar, Rabbi David Jaffe, he learned from him, and, and some of his teachers learned from him as well. He says, the reality of the universe is that we're all deeply connected. Of course, there's actually no such thing as race. Humans are, deeply connected to each other. We're connected to plants, connected to other animals. The deep reality of the universe is a deep connection. The problem is that we forget that, right? And we experience life in fractals. We experience our inner life as separate from our interpersonal interactions as separate from our communal interactions, are communal, separate from what's happening at an organizational level, and what's happening at the organizational level as separate from the society. And the truth is that it all deeply influences each other. What's happening in the inner life is going to show up and influence and impact our interpersonal interactions. And those interpersonal interactions that happen on a board level, for example, will impact the entire governance of an organization, right? And that how that plays out at an organizational level will impact society around us and our communities, right? And vice versa. And so the challenge that I think we're stuck with is, of course, we have to be separate entities in a way to have our sense of individualism and who we are, but we also can't forget the deep interconnected reality that is animating the story of who we are in the world and as a community, and particularly and certainly on boards. And I think that, you know, in my experience on boards, it can be challenging, right? Because we have different we have different ideas. We're vying for power. We have a vision of where we think the things should go, right? But if we can hold on to the interconnected reality that we are, the hope and bring to bear some of the tools of Mussar, the hope is that we can find a path that will bring us all to a shared desired outcome. And I think that's what I'm thinking about is what is really the desired outcome here? Is it just to get my way? Or is it more for unity such that we all get some kind of resolution that brings us closer to the vision a shared vision that we have?
Amen. Thank you for that, Yehudah. You make me think of two things. One, that the interconnectedness, not Mussar related, but that Adrienne Marie Brown talks about in Emergent Strategy, and the mycelium and the root, your ground, and how just everything, we are so connected as individuals, as humans, as living beings, to plants, to fungi, to everything you just said is one thing that resonates. And then you started talking about, again, the kind of the tools of Mussar, and again, the little I know around midot and different kind of examples of values or ethics. Can you share a little bit, maybe, and then I want to open up to folks who have their own questions, either favorite midot or midot that you might highlight as being most important or relevant for those serving on boards of nonprofits?
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, one of Rabbi Yisroel Salanter's students, Rabbi Yosef Yozel, he had this idea of a soul curriculum, and that each person has a soul curriculum. And that soul curriculum isn't decided by us per se, but rather is made up of the character traits that we continuously run into, either as our strengths or as our weaknesses. And we only really know which character traits are our strengths and our weaknesses through the work of community service. So it's in the work of doing some leadership or governance or serving the community, when the rubber meets the road and things get really hard and tight, then we see, oh, are we patient? Are we quick to anger? Do we have compassion? Right? And he has this analogy of a wheel, and that as the wheel turns, you know, the spokes of the wheel are our character traits. And as the wheel turns and, you know, the rubber, wherever the rubber hits the road, you know, if our character trait, we think about them, you know, let's say courage, humility, patience, trust. If the spoke on the wheel is too short, you can get where you're going, but it's gonna be a wobbly ride. If it's too long and you're coming too much with a particular character trait for the need of the moment, again, you might get there, but it's going to be quite bumpy. You know, you might be a little bruised once you get there, right? And so I think that's oftentimes, it really resonates with me. It's oftentimes how I experience a lot of things, right? Where I might get to where I'm going, but I came out of it with some bruises, right? It didn't quite go. And that's an indication of, wow, one of my traits wasn't really in proper orientation. It wasn't properly balanced, right? Um, and so it may be that because of our prior habituation and some of our characteristics in life, that we may be predisposed to patience,
Mm.
right? However, the need of the moment might call for us to be a little bit more boundaried, right? To, no, actually, this is not what's happening here. Whereas another moment might call for a great sense of compassion, and we may be kind of predisposed to some kind of harshness, but closed offness, and we're not really able to meet that moment because our spoke is too short, right? And so that's really so. I'll answer, but I want to say that it's really each one of us. Our soul curriculum is going to look differently depending who we are. And oftentimes you'll find that on your soul curriculum really are the things that you're strong with. Because when things get hard, we kind of fall back on what we know we're good at. And we kind of use it as a hammer when we need a wrench. And again, it might get the job done, but everything around is going to be a little banged up, right? So I do think that there are particular traits that might be useful for a board, but it's really the discernment is in here, right? For you to know, for you to take a look at. I think generally, and this might be a reflection of what I know I need in my leadership and my governance. Take care, Carrie. Is oftentimes need humility. I think the Mussar reframing of humility is as space taking, and what's the appropriate amount of space to take. I oftentimes fall back on sablanut, on which is translated as forbearance, but oftentimes if you look it up, you'll see it's translated as patience. But I like forbearance better because it really speaks to the heart of it, which is to bear with another and to bear with the struggles of another, or the ability to keep your goodness flowing. There's a yeah, thanks for that, Seth. There's a mystical teaching from the Tomer Devorah, and he talks about this quality of being able to withstand insult and keep our goodness flowing, a character that Hashem has for us, and we also need to be able to hold that. Of course, all of this is has to be held in the context of what's the power dynamic here, right? Like if you have less power in a situation, no one's asking you, you got a knee on your neck, no one's asking you to forbear that. And no one should be asking you to forbear that and to keep your goodness flowing. But if you have power, like with a child, an adult to a child, and they insult you, yeah, I mean, the hope is that you can withstand that insult and still keep your goodness flowing to that kid, right? So the same applies to other situations with other adults. You can understand what the power dynamic is. Can you actually do that? And it's not easy, I'll say that. And the last thing that I'll say is trust, bitachon in the Hebrew. And yeah, just the ability to have like trust in one another. That's also a very challenging thing that I found in my leadership. Ability to let go and know that the success of what's happening is not going to be on my effort alone, but to trust not just in my teammates and in others, but in Hashem and source that, the story is going to be continued. I got to put in my effort, but it's not all on me, right? And at a certain level, just let go and trust. And as things shift and things go badly, to say, hey, all right, what's coming at us? How do we meet this moment? What about you, Seth?
That's well, thank you for that, Yehudah. I love just the balance. I love, again, from your class and just your continued teaching and just learning with you. It's not one way or the other, right? Whether it's trust or patience or humility, to find that middle ground. And sometimes you got to lean one way or the other, but I like that spoke analogy. You don't want the spoke to be, or the spoke to be too small or too long.
Yep.
The one that's resonant for me right now, and I was just talking with my wife last night about it, is Yirah, fear and awe.
Mhm.
I mean, it's funny. How does that relate to boards? Because we were talking about something else, but I feel like I say, yeah, the couple boards, there's a fear that we're going to say or do the wrong thing,
Mhm. Mhm.
uh, and piss off another board member or a colleague or the ED. And there's awe also of just being in that privilege, being in that place of power, and having that that situational authority.
Mhm. Mhm. I love that.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
What I want to open up, thank you for asking me. I'm curious, we have about 10, 12 minutes left for folks who want to ask Yehudah any questions. I got a few more here if you don't, but is there anything that you want to dig deeper on with Yehudah on Mussar or the Midot and governance in general?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate the discussion. Very enlightening and spiritually uplifting too. So thanks for that. I think we all want to be better people. That's kind of innate in most people. The things specifically in my life that has most made me want to be a better person are, number one, being a dad.
Mhm.
You know that kids are going to listen to what you say, but mostly they're going to watch what you do. So if I
Mhm.
want to do the right thing and be good, I got to be good myself. But the second thing was being a CEO. I was an entrepreneur. I had my own companies, and I realized pretty quickly when I was a new CEO that my personal shortcomings were getting in the way of me being the best CEO I could be, and I could see it was unfair to the people in my staff. My personal shortcomings, whether they were emotional, psychological, behavioral, or ethical, whatever it was. So it really inspired me to do more. And then I thought, I'm really big on we post our values on the wall, which is really easy to do. Living
Mhm.
by them is harder, and knowing if you're living by them without flattering yourself is also hard. So one of our values, by the way, was accountability. So one of the
Mhm.
ways that we displayed that was we would do frequent, usually quarterly or semi-annual anonymous surveys of the staff. And among
Mhm.
the other things we'd ask is, how well are we living up to these values? And
Mhm.
sometimes we did better than others, but it was a metric that came back, and it pissed me off when they rated me low on a value, but that's the truth. So accountability is important. I implied that when I was first a board chair, the first board I
Mhm.
was chair, and now I'm on the governance committee for the federation here in San Francisco. And we just did a big strategic refresh, and we
Mhm.
implement the same sort of thing there, where there's two-way accountability. Once a year, everybody gets a one-on-one interview with the chair of the board or a member of the governance committee, and they're first asked, here are the things that are expected of you of a board member. Rate yourself, how you doing on them. And one of the great things about that technique is most people are doing decently well. The people who aren't, they usually resign from the board. That's
Mhm.
kind of the deadwood problem. People don't know how do you get rid of board members? They get rid of themselves if you ask them for accountability. But the
Mhm.
flip side of the survey is, how are we doing as a board? How are we running the meetings? You're getting the materials you need in advance, all that kind of stuff. So I
Mhm.
found that sort of, I'm not sure if that's a midot, but the whole notion of accountability is a way to apply this to board work. And I'm curious, do you have other techniques where you can apply this notion of midot, which is so powerful, to actually practically leading a board or being on a board?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And, love the process and how you've applied this in your own life. And as I said, Mussar is a way, but it's not the only way, clearly, right? And so there's so many different ways to better ourselves and really bridge that gap. In Mussar, there are many schools of thought. One of them, and the one that I'm most familiar with and have practiced, is the use of a VOD, a spiritual practice group. And we do a loving accountability check-in every week. And we say, yeah, you come out of each meeting with your group or with your pair with a recommitment to the practice, right? Musar is a very practical, concrete based approach, right? Let's say you want to grow in your generosity. Just say you want to grow in generosity. You don't just give one entity $1,000. You give $1 every day for 1,000 days, right? So the question is, okay, if you're taking that on as a practice, did you do it? right? So every week he'd come back and say, did you do it? And if he didn't, why not? Right. And so it's that level of, similarly to what you shared, Mark, a level of accountability, and not in a harsh or mean way. I mean, Mussar of old, if you talk about Mussar in some Orthodox, more observant communities, there's kind of a stigma because it was, in some instances, it's a very like punitive,
Mhm.
like wagging the finger kind of thing. But the way that we're working with Mussar is a much more similarly, like, you rate yourself. Did you do it? Like, be honest with yourself. I mean, it's for you, right? And I'm just here as a mirror, right? Not as a coach or somebody who's going to tell you you're not doing it right. And that, I think, is really effective in helping supporting folks in their growth.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for that, Mark and Yehudah. The loving accountability reminds me of our last guest, Ananda Valenzuela, who does a lot of work as an interim ED and a consultant around liberatory governance. She lifts up two main roles or responsibilities of board members, which I love. One is loving accountability, to hold your board, hold your staff, hold your team accountable, but lovingly with compassion, holding up that mirror. I love that. And the second is abundant resourcing, not only giving money, but giving their time, connections, technical assistance. And I feel like, again, as a former ED and as a board member now and a consultant, boards get so caught up in the 10 or 20 or 30 different roles and responsibilities. And I loved how she just elevated those two as loving accountability and abundant resourcing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can you, Yehudah, would you mind saying a bit more, like practically how that might work to have the Avad? You said you had like some sort of circles or something going on in the board. I'm trying to figure out at Clue, like what we basically talk about is we're bringing this like moral voice to these questions of economic accountability, right? Economic justice. But are we practicing those values ourselves, like with each other? Not always, right? And so I'd love to invite my board into that kind of accountability with each other. And so I'm just trying to think about practically how that might work.
Yeah. 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 I think it's a challenge a lot for boards because boards don't tend to meet as regularly as needed for that kind of loving accountability, to really be held, for the container to really be held. Mussar VOD, again, VOD being a spiritual practice group, it's two things I'll say. In my experience, you have to have a yearning for this kind of growth and accountability yourself. To volunteer someone to do it, it doesn't really work out. So the people have to really want it. So once you get the folks who want it, they meet every 2 weeks. And you have somebody who facilitates, and you do some learning around the value that you're working on. Let's just say it's this forbearance idea, bearing with each other. And you're working on that value, you learn a little bit about that value. And from that learning, you have some suggested practices that you can take on, and everyone for themselves. It's like, well, what's going to be the practice that's going to help you build muscle for you, where you within the spectrum of this character trait needs to refine yourself and needs to grow. You break from there, and in the in-between week, the hope is that you always have a touch point once a week, so that folks who forgot, things came up, they can get back on the horse, the proverbial horse. So, that touch point for us is normally what we call a chavruta partner, a study partner, a pair. So you meet with your person for 20 to 30 minutes on the off week when the group's not meeting. And you have a little protocol for them, a check-in, how did practice go? What challenges came up? Why aren't you practicing? it's a real accounting of the soul. And you come out of that with, okay, so maybe you'll come up with a plan. Oh, the thing that I decided to take on, I didn't do it because I was too tired. I committed to doing it too late in the day, and I was tired after work, and I just never got to it. It's like, all right, so now maybe the correction is you'll do it in the morning, right? And that comes from the person. It's not something, but it's through the conversation. And then try again, and then you come back as a group, and the group again, and so you have loving accountability again as a group, and everyone goes around and says, did you do it? Did you not do it? What happened? And and depending on where the group is, you might say, okay, we're going to stay with this value for another 2 weeks, or we're going to go to a new value and learn something new. So that's kind of the rhythm that it flows with. But it's challenging with the board. I really do appreciate that. It really is. Folks are busy.
Sorry, I had a question where listening to you, I feel like I can really see how a board's function and efficiency can be greatly enhanced by the personal connections of the board member, which is a lot of kind of what you're talking about in terms of being better people and elevating, recognizing our contributions and our traits and what might get in the way. The challenge I have is I feel like whenever we have some kind of social gathering, it's so helpful, something outside the board meeting, outside of the content of the work that we need to do. But everybody's so busy, it's hard to justify the time that would take to do that, in addition to serving on the board, being on a committee, participating in events of our organization, just all of that. So that's kind of my conundrum.
It is a conundrum. I think that is, going back to the fractals part, right, that I was talking about. I mean, that's just the way that society influences our ability to show up as leaders, right? We're just so busy, and we're so split between 1,000 different obligations and commitments that it makes it very challenging for us to actually invest in ourselves in the way that we know that will actually help us be more and not just do more, right? And I don't have the silver bullet for that. If you do, y'all let me know, because I'm also asking that question.
Thanks for that, Juliet and Yehudah. We're just a minute to go. So Yehudah, just a lot of thanks and gratitude for you being here today, and Jennifer and Mark and Juliet. It's great to see you. I'll close with one other just kind of shout out, just as a theme. Board Source talks about their new for the last few years is purpose-driven board leadership, and one of the modalities, one of the themes, one of the principles of that is purpose. There's two: purpose before organization and respect for the ecosystem. There's 1 and 2. But what that reminds me of, Yehudah, like you shared about before, it's beyond thinking about what that organization, what your organization or what your board is doing, and thinking beyond the purpose and thinking about the ecosystem in which the organization operates. So I just something that you were saying and others were saying, I wanted to lift that up. In closing, thank you so much again. Our next board talk is December 20th. We'll have Paula Pretlow, she's the chair, and Rachel Monroe is the president and CEO of the Weinberg Foundation in Baltimore. So I hope we can move our boards to a place of power with rather than power over. I encourage us to show up and continue to slow down, check in with your CEO and your board colleagues to see how they're doing, continue building relationships and building community. I hope you're all safe and sound and have a restful weekend. And thanks again so much.
Thanks. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
All right.